Hello, everybody. This is the first episode of my podcast with a new website. And I'm so excited to finally have a blog again. I used to blog all the time when I first started proofreadanywhere.com. In fact, it started as a blog. There was a blog post before there was ever an online course, before there was ever a product. There was a blog post. So I feel great to be back in the writing saddle, so to speak. And with recent things coming to light in my reality, so to speak, recently, I just turned 37, by the way, on March 2nd. And it was like the universe was like, yep, you're ready to get it now. You're ready to see it for what it really was. And a lot of that had to do with the fact that I had finished selling my company in October last year, even though my former CEOs swore up and down that they wouldn't come through. They wouldn't come through. And I didn't give in. I didn't give in to any of the fear tactics he was using even then, trying to get me to convince the new owners to pay off the note that they owed us early. Then he was trying to pressure me to do things I didn't want to do. Yeah, I think part of that had something to do with it, with not being owed any money and not needing any monumentous tasks, or so-called, so I believed, or perceived to be monumentous tasks to be undertaken, such as filing tax returns. I reached out to our CPA and I've gotten the engagement letter. I've paid the bill. Now I'm just waiting for next steps so I can get that taken care of. I don't need him to do that. He's been paid out $460,000, a severance payment. He is no longer employed by me. There is no longer a shareholder agreement between us. It was terminated as soon as we sold the assets of the company, so I owe him nothing. I canceled our insurance benefits at the end of April. I could have done it by the end of this month, but I waited until May. I just was feeling nice, I guess. No, it was actually self-seeking in that way, but I was protecting his feelings so much. And I realized I didn't give a great introduction to this podcast because I didn't know what I was going to say when I turned on the microphone and started to speak. I thought when I said, okay, I'm going to record my new blog post, because I want to do an audio version for all my blog posts. And I was like, well, why don't I make the blog and the podcast kind of the same thing, where if you tune in for the podcast, you'll probably get a few behind the scenes takes on my experience emotionally writing my blog post. Because what I'm planning to do, I didn't get into too much detail on this in the blog post itself, but what I'm planning to do is write a book. And people have been asking me to write a book for as long as I can remember, and I wrote one that came out in April 2019 called Work at Home, which it'll be included in the book, how that was sold with the company and whatnot. But I was told it had no value by this particular CEO, and it's now out of print because it's my name's on it. It's my story, so it was sold to them when they couldn't even really use it. Although, let's be honest, the main assets were not the book. I wasn't really making any money on the book, which is why it had no value in the sale. But he didn't mean it like that. He was really trying to disempower me and keep me disempowered and think that what I had to offer had no value. And I have been so quiet about it for so long. It was this weekend at my friend Erica's house where she was just like, he's like narcissistic, right? And I'm like, well, I can see that he was... And she's like, no, literally everything that you are saying about him, every story you've told sounds like textbook narcissist. And I started looking more into it and looked up sociopathic narcissists and the business, because you hear about it in relationships and stuff. Like there's videos all over TikTok and YouTube about narcissism in romantic relationships. And that's all the exposure I ever had to it. In fact, a lot of the exposure came from listening to him talk about the former people he'd worked with were all narcissists, yet somehow they're all doing better than him. And they seem to be enjoying their lives more than him. So I don't know if you can hear that plane going. I'm in my driveway at home right now, just hanging out. And I've been writing most of the day today, and it was just super cathartic. And once I realized, like, oh my gosh, I don't have to wait on him to make any decisions anymore, because once I paid out that severance, and seriously, you cannot put a price on freedom. Like, I would have paid any amount to be free of him. And I did, honestly, because that was the best way out, is to just go through it and not resist it, right? I feel like I'm learning so much about that. If you just like not resist what's trying to come out of you, then maybe you'll be able to release what's not serving you anymore and not hide it. And other people are going to be able to learn from every part of your story and to trust in that, because I didn't for so long. It had become so much part of my nature, belief system, reality, that I had to stay quiet about how this man treated me in our business relationship, that bad things are going to happen. But that's like part of their ploy. They make it seem like bad things are going to happen the moment you do something that pisses them off, because that's literally what they do. They do something bad or mean or scary. The moment you piss them off, the moment they think that they're not going to get what they want from you, they will make it seem like your life will be over if you don't do what they want. And I did not know that that was a tactic. So it is my mission to, and I'm using my other microphone today. I hear noises from it when I move the cord. I don't know if you guys can hear that, but I'll try not to move the cord as much just in case. Yeah, so it's kind of like my mission in life to identify anything that might be holding me back, causing me to hide myself in some way out of fear of someone else's reaction, and asking myself, are those stories that I'm telling myself true, or am I holding back on telling the stories that will set me free? The truth will always set us free, and if we are brave enough to tell it, oh man, good things happen. Like, you just start feeling so much lighter, and you don't feel like you're hiding anything from yourself anymore. Like, you're the only one who knows what really happened, and you're afraid to say it because of the other person who was involved making you sound like you're a lunatic or crazy, or you're the one to blame, that they're all innocent because they're that crafty. Like, they're just that crafty. They will do anything to get their way, and they don't care at whose expense. They do not care at all. So I'm just getting started with what I'm about to read to you. You'll have the audio version of it in a minute, plus these 7 or 8 bonus minutes of me reflecting on it as I've written it. So I hope you enjoy it. Without further ado, I shall read my new blog post entitled, How I Let a Sociopath Run My Business, Why Business Owners Are Afraid to Talk. Welcome to my new website and blog, my new home on the web, where I'm the only owner. I'm the only one with control over what gets published. Here is where I can share fearlessly, authentically, and openly. So let's begin. Over my 37th birthday weekend, I decided my next book would be part memoir, part self-transformation. That means I need to share the stories that past Caitlin was too afraid, too ashamed to share. Starting with this one. This is the very first new blog post that I have published on my brand new website, selftransformation.com. It's also the first post I've written in over 4 years. It's about how I let a sociopath take over my business. It seems like nobody talks about psychopaths, sociopaths, or narcissists in business relationships because there's usually a lot at stake. I've got no contact with the sociopathic CEO I hired to help me sell my company. I feel free to share this now because just yesterday I realized I no longer owed him anything. No more money, no more insurance benefits, no more explanations, and the best part, there is no longer any need to ask his permission to create anything. There's no need for him to approve of, validate, or ensure that the company, as he always pronounced it, had the resources available for me to create. There are also no longer any valid contracts between us that legally require me to share any of my new life or business with him. I'm not angry. I'm just done. I'm done hiding my true self for fear that he won't approve. We already know he could do it better. I'm done not sharing the stories I'm about to start sharing out of fear of how he will react. I don't care about his reactions anymore. I'm done tossing my pearls to swine. For the record, it's not bad to be a pig, swine. A pig is just a much lower form of consciousness that simply cannot see value, your pearls, the same way higher conscious humans can. Therefore, it makes no sense to give your pearls to pigs. I'm so grateful to be free of this individual. It was such a giant light bulb, an extreme breakthrough moment when I realized this past weekend that OMG, he is now calling me a scammer for hosting a virtual retreat that actually gets people results fast because he's a sociopath. He enjoys tearing me down. That means he enjoyed tearing me down and watching me suffer when we worked together too. It's not that it wasn't obvious at the time that he was a sociopath, it's that my own zone of awareness at the time could not perceive the red flags, could not perceive them. And there were so many red flags. Like the very first time he touched me, it was July of 2020. He'd come for a visit. We'd hung out a few times before. This was nothing new, except this time he'd come to my house instead of me going to his, which I guess that was something new. His suitcase was in the guest room upstairs. We were in my pool. I remember it like it was yesterday. He approached me from behind and started massaging my neck and shoulders, wrapping his left arm around the front of my shoulders to hold me steady. "I want you to kiss me," I said. Without saying a word, he turned me around, and he did, for 20 minutes. Later, we ended up in my bed, although we didn't technically have intercourse. He let himself go on me. Ew. I know. Ew. Not knowing that I had extreme stress-related hormone imbalances at the time that was throwing off whom I found attractive, I found myself suddenly super attracted to this guy. It helped that he'd just put on quite a bit of muscle, a major change from the spindly, scrawny, and undernourished frame he usually kept. I'd known him for almost 3 years, having met him at an entrepreneur networking event when he was dating another fiery female entrepreneur. Yes, the linked article in the original post from Selena Sue is about the same person. He'd supposedly helped so many other people, including several other entrepreneurs like me. But they hadn't treated him right. They hadn't seen his value. They were narcissists and nobody liked working with them, according to him. As we lay in bed later that night, I listened to him recount all the hotshot entrepreneurs who hooked up with so-and-so at such and such event. I was surprised at how in the know he was. I didn't yet know that sociopaths are really good at gathering so-called dirt on people and saving it for a rainy day. Seeing the signs. The weird part was that he was currently obsessed with the soon-to-be ex-wife of another popular entrepreneur in our space who was going through a tumultuous divorce at the time. That time things got physical in my house, he'd spent the entire day texting her, or was it obsessively writing and rewriting a letter to her, trying desperately to convince her not to reject him? Could there be a reason he was being rejected and tossed out by these other entrepreneurial women? Could there be a reason related to who he was that was causing these so-called rejections? The rejections that were causing him so much unbearable, let me help you with that immediately, pain? He'd always blamed ADHD, for which he took a high dose of Vyvanse daily. But I remember distinctly that he was off his meds that weekend. He'd taken a 2-hour Uber ride to my house earlier that day. He didn't change clothes once. I took photos of him with his jeans rolled up to his knees with his feet in my pool, glued to his phone screen. I gave him a portable charger so he could carry around his dying phone to continue penning the perfect letter for her. I even helped him write the letter. I even agreed to call this poor woman from my phone and leave her a voicemail on his behalf, pleading his case. The things he said to me that night and the way he treated me as if I wasn't even there, those should have been warning signs enough. But when you're not well and you've just been through an extremely traumatizing event that literally landed you in the psych ward, you don't see things clearly. He was highly manipulative and self-serving. He always has been. I just couldn't see it before, but that's exactly how they work. When you know better, you can do better. I know better now, so I am doing much, much better. Most importantly, I know firsthand how damaging psychiatric medications are to the brain. Knowing this allows me to have compassion on this individual whose brain may, in fact, have become so damaged that he can't feel real empathy or compassion. I know he's only doing his best with his current awareness. I also know the healthiest choice for me now is to choose not to be around him, even at his best, anymore. I know it's safe to share my experience. It doesn't need to be filtered through him first. I'm already certain he doesn't agree. But I also know there's nothing he can do to stop me. This is my lived experience. These are my thoughts, feelings, and emotions that I experienced. There's no more sociopath in my ear telling me that I'm crazy, lying, over-dramatizing, being ungrateful or stupid for thinking or feeling a certain way. We had many conversations about whether or not selling the business was something I really wanted to do. He worked tirelessly to instill fear in me that if I didn't sell the business, it was undoubtedly going to fail. If I didn't seal my bottom and eliminate that unavoidable risk altogether by selling the business, it was only a matter of time before everything just, dried up? Failed? Competition would take over because there's such a low barrier to entry. He said anything to convince me that what I could contribute, who I was, had nothing to do with the success of the business. Incidentally, my worthlessness and lack of contribution made it even easier for him to sell the business to investors. Getting rid of him. Selling my company was the only way to get rid of him once he was in. It ended up costing me so much time, money, and confidence. This individual made sure I knew he was saving me from myself, that my products had always been awful, but now they weren't, all thanks to him, and that the best way forward was to seal my bottom and eliminate the risk of business failure by selling the company to the highest bidders. He made sure I knew that I didn't matter, but I remember who I am now. I've come home to myself. I know that what I have to say matters. As I rebuild my audience and grow my new brand, selftransformation.com, I'm investing significant time into working with the new owners of Proofread Anywhere in creative, mutually beneficial ways that allow me to continue sharing with the very same people I let them convince me didn't really care about me or what I had to say. So without further ado or spoilers, here's the introduction to my new book. It's supposed to be a little artsier than the introduction to the introduction, basically. And I'm ultimately going to give all of my writings in this blog post about this whole story and how I became able to tell this story and start this website, selftransformation.com. All of the journey will be in my new book. So an editor is going to need to help me organize all of this information because it was a shit show. Okay, so this is how it all started. Picking back up and reading you the intro to the book. In early July of 2020, right after ending a 6-month situationship with a toxic live-in boyfriend who'd threatened to harm me while drunk on the 4th of July, I experienced a prolonged state of what doctors called acute manic psychosis. And I was diagnosed with bipolar disorder twice that month. Incidentally, it was also July of 2020 when he made himself CEO of my company. I talked to him nearly every day I was in the hospital the second time that month. Why did his employment contract say he started in July 2020 when he didn't start working on any company business until late August, you ask? Your guess is as good as mine. All I know is that when he became CEO of my company, any doctor would have declared me unfit to make such decisions. I spent nearly half the month of July 2020 involuntarily committed to a psychiatric inpatient unit with acute manic psychosis. He said he'd been saving me from myself, from a dying business in a dying industry, and that the smartest choice was to cash out before it was too late. He was so good at talking, especially at first. He promised he'd grow my company to $8 million in revenue in 3 years. He even made it into neat little bonus milestones on his employment contract, so it seemed like he thought it was realistic, or at least not impossible. So I'd believe in him, so I'd trust him. But to believe in him, I had to stop believing in myself first. I had to believe that my success in growing a business from nothing to where it had gotten by July of 2020 had been mostly luck. No actual talent or skill went into it, especially not for me. I had to believe that my programs were crappy, and that was the only logical reason my students weren't finishing them. It couldn't be that they were humans leading human lives, and thus there were an infinite number of reasons why somebody would have trouble finishing an online course that they'd purchased. But no, it had to be accepted that before he came on board as CEO, the company had had crappy content until he came in and noticed, until he came in and cared enough to make it all better. Before I knew that my brain was damaged and not functioning properly, I actually believed I was a narcissist for nearly 2 years. It was a major source of my depression. This horrifying belief I had about myself tormented me day and night. I was so utterly devastated by this belief that I did not want to go on living. I told him every dark detail about it too. He constantly pushed me to take antidepressants and dangerous drugs like Adderall, assuring me that they'd help me feel better and that they'd worked for him. It didn't matter how often people told me that narcissists never become aware of themselves as being narcissistic. I didn't believe any of them because I knew how empty I felt inside, and I had decided that that empty feeling was something I deserved. As long as I thought I was a narcissist, it made it easier for him to play the good guy. It wouldn't be until my 37th birthday, sitting on my friend Erica's back porch, that the scales fell off my eyes and I saw him for who he really was and who he'd always been. While I had grown, learned, and shifted as a person so much since July of 2020, he hadn't had the same experience. A few weeks before my 37th birthday, he'd begun ridiculing me for the new project I was working on, a live virtual retreat experience called Transform. He first told me how much he loved the emails, the new retreat offer, the sales page. He literally said, "I love everything about it." But then, right before I cut off all contact, he'd texted me, "Everyone I talk to about it says it sounds just like another one of your scams, that you can't help but scam people." Huh? Scam people by helping them heal themselves emotionally, which is often accompanied by physical healing too. And doing it rapidly? That's your definition of a scam? I know he's not open to what I'm teaching now because he's so bought into the brainwashing of mainstream Western medicine that it is so incredibly harmful to so many, including him, but he doesn't see it. He's been on dangerous, mind-altering pharmaceuticals for more than 20 years, and I'm the one with a problem. It's because I'm not a doctor that he thinks I shouldn't be allowed to share my experience of healing firsthand, and that what I use to heal is quackery because it's not promoted or paid for by Big Pharma. It's literally in my nature to share my experience and wisdom with others. It's what I've been doing now for close to a decade. This is what helps other people actually heal themselves. Even my Myers-Briggs personality type is the healer. How many mainstream doctors do you know with track records of healing mental illness, healing autoimmune? I'm not talking about successful management with medication paired with years of ongoing talk therapy that honestly gets you nowhere but stuck. That sad, so-called gold standard in mental health treatment has healed no one. And by healing, I'm talking about complete and total obliteration of symptoms. Getting to the root cause of the symptoms is something you can do yourself. It's your body. Nobody can care about it or know more about how it works than you can, being the soul living inside of it. The only reason you believe you can't do it yourself is because you've been brainwashed to believe that you must hand your personal power to heal your own body to a man or woman in a white coat who has been trained to heal. Except, in case you haven't noticed, there's no true healing going on in the vast majority of Western doctors' offices these days. Would you rather learn the next step from someone who's gotten real first-hand results, or from someone whose literal job it is to keep you sick? Why should I keep my mouth shut about exactly how I healed my brain and body when all doctors were doing was harming me? That's what this book is for, helping you see where all your power is going and helping you take that power back. Now, back to my 37th birthday on my friend Erica's porch. That's when it hit me. He hated my power. He resented it, and he did what he could to subvert it, invert it, discourage it, gaslight me about it, and convince me that it didn't exist and that other people needed to be in charge, like him, in the case of my business, or qualified doctors, in the case of my health. I realized he's so disconnected from himself. He vibrates at such a low frequency that he simply cannot see me. He cannot see my worth. He cannot see raw talent or capability if it slaps him in the face. He sees only what he's able to see within the tiny zone of energy he's vibing in. That's his reality. In his reality, everyone is stupid compared to him. If you question him or call him out on something, it must mean they're not grateful for everything he's doing while you're doing nothing. He couldn't possibly be doing something wrong by running someone else's Google ads while being CEO of another company or lying about it when he got caught red-handed. He couldn't possibly be doing something wrong by claiming he rightfully earned a $230,000 bonus in 2020, even though he didn't gain access to any of the company assets until more than 8 months into the year. He couldn't possibly be doing something wrong by repeatedly telling the new owners of the company who bought Proofread Anywhere that he didn't want to stay on with the company just so he could extract a $460,000 severance payment from me that he'd only get if he weren't offered the job by the new owners. Nothing wrong at all. If he feels resentful about his past business and personal failings, taking over someone else's business to save it is the perfect opportunity to make himself feel better about himself. When he gives himself titles like CEO and president and gives you titles like executive chairman and secretary, but insists that titles don't mean anything, he's gaslighting you. He's beginning the sociopath's work of death by 1,000 cuts, the work of ever so slowly smudging the lens through which you see yourself and awakening you to the truth that you actually really suck, and without him, your business is worthless. It was his idea to sell the company. He'd said that he'd sensed I was bored with it, and it was a perfect time to sell before it was too late. He said it was only a matter of time before AI wiped out all opportunities for proofreaders, something I didn't and still don't believe will ever happen because even the most advanced robots will always lack empathy and the magic of human emotion. And now that my brain and body are healed, I see very clearly how it all started, how a malignant, narcissistic sociopath snuck into my business and why it took me so long to realize what was happening, and I'm going to tell you everything. It felt really good to read that. I don't know if you noticed a shift in my energy halfway through, and I was like, oh my gosh, this feels so good to just be letting this out and not pretending that it didn't happen or pretending that I must have remembered something wrong or I must have experienced it wrong or I couldn't have trusted myself because I was mentally ill, right? No, that was the whole game, to get me to not trust myself. So I would only trust him, and that way he would get to do what he wanted to do. And it worked, but I don't think he had any idea that the universe has my back and that this would eventually become a foundation for many more stories and transformations on my new website, selftransformation.com, on this podcast. Just sharing your story matters. So if there's a story that you want to tell and you want to be able to share it, whether it's anonymously or whether you come on maybe even as a guest on the podcast and we'll tell your story, I want to give you a voice. I want to allow you to share your story of self-transformation, even in spite of the so-called crappy things that happen to us. I'll see you in the next episode. Thanks for tuning in, and I hope you enjoy the new website.